Hi, everybody. This is Dan Stolbarger. Welcome to this week's KFIR Middle East Update. It's the week of April 29th. For the next 2 weeks, I'll just be reminding you of the fact that from May 12th to June 15th, Sharon and I will be in Israel. And because of that, the Middle East updates will only be available via the PDF PowerPoint format that we use all the time. Because Wi-Fi is not 100% reliable, uploading studio where it's quiet. Over the years, I've found it very difficult to do YouTube videos there. So I think it's just easier to send everything out in the PDF PowerPoint format. Again, we will be covering all things Israel, and this time not from up here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, but in the midst of Jerusalem, Judea, up in the Galilee, etc., etc. So again, stay connected. It might be a good time for you to invite friends, family members, people that you work with that have an interest in the Middle East, in Israel, to sign up for our KFIR global community. It's all free. And in the first slide, you see I've given you that sort of link that you can sign people up. So what's going on this week in the Middle East? We always start with our news bites. And we know that the Bennett coalition government with Lapid is some would say it's on its last legs. Some would say it's a place in desperation, backed into a corner. We're going to obviously hear more and more in the days, weeks, and months to come. But just 2 weeks after Bennett's coalition suffered sort of a loss of one party member, and then the Arab Party, quote, froze their commitment. It seems like there's a rallying that's taking place. Again, what you're having here is desperation to keep Netanyahu out of office once again. Netanyahu is telling his supporters that Likud will be returning to power soon. So again, we'll keep track of all of this, and what better place to report than in the middle of it all in Israel. Interesting that one of 4 Jewish American millennials concealed their Jewish identity, and they distanced themselves from Israel. This is according to a poll that was just released last Monday by the American Jewish Committee. So again, those are our news bites for the week, and then we sort of jump into the major topics. I found this interesting with everything that's taking place with the so-called Iranian nuclear deal, that according to, what's this guy's title, one of the bigwigs in Iran, Motahari, I think his name is, his quote basically is, the purpose of Iran's nuclear program was always to build an atomic weapon. He's the deputy speaker of the Islamic Assembly. And he told Israel News last Sunday that contrasting the Islamic Republic's official position that its nuclear program was or intended always to be peaceful in nature, he just came out and said, no one, if they just want a reactor, no one first establishes centrifuges or whatever and enriching things. No, bottom line is that we've always wanted a bomb. Black and white, truth told here, come clean. Iran simply wants a nuclear weapon. The frightening thing is once they have it, will they use it? And Israel's not willing to take bets on that. They're going to want to deal with the situation before, quote, they have it. And then everything that's been taking place on the Temple Mount. As we've been reporting over the last few weeks, Ramadan, Easter, Passover, all converging at the same time. And it seems like now every year, Hamas wants to get into the mix. Everybody kind of wants to poke the bear. And a lot of it is just blood libel. It's lies. Anytime you want to rile up, start riots, and you do this for your own purposes, concessions or whatever. And to be honest with you, Hamas has been successful in riling people up on the Temple Mount that right now, for the next, 8 days or whatever, Jews are not allowed on the Temple Mount as Ramadan comes to an end. And so these final days, because of the rioting that's been taking place, no Jews allowed on the Temple Mount. Bottom line is that the rioting is Palestinian oriented. It's everybody, like I said, wanting to kind of see what kind of leverage they can get, lashing out again the image of Israel. And then everybody wants to have a slice of the pie. Jordan in particular, they want to control the Temple Mount. And it's important because the Hashemite kingdom has 60 to 70% Palestinians in Jordan, and the King Abdullah wants to be seen in favor of supporting, and so he's pushing for more and more control of the Temple Mount. And then last week, as we reported, Russia's getting in the mix as well, which is a major concern. If you know anything about end of days prophecy, you know that there's some sort of coalition from the north headed up by Russia that will ultimately one day invade Israel. And so now you've got Russia not only dealing with Ukraine, you've got Russia partnering with Syria, and think Golan Heights, think the northern border. And now, in the past, I would say, 6 months, there's been this sort of relationship between the Israelis and Russians. And now, because the Israelis have been critical of the Ukrainian war, Russia is starting to focus their attention against Israel, coming out last week and saying, we're siding with the Palestinians. Recently, they've said, and by the way, we're not 100%, the Golan Heights belongs to Israel. We think it's Syrian. So all of this is part of that cauldron that's bubbling over right now in the Middle East. And then Israel's made it clear that they will bomb Damascus, Syria, anytime they sense there's weapons being transported from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this week, 5 Syrians were killed, 4 Iranians were killed when the Israeli Air Force struck, it was Tuesday night, struck in the vicinity of Damascus, and they killed a total of 9 military personnel. The Syrians, having the Russian anti-aircraft equipment, claimed that they were able to knock out a variety of missiles that were launched. But in the midst of all this, keep in mind, the Russian army is in the midst of Syria right now. Again, in the past, we know that the Russian army is conscripting Syrians to volunteer to fight Ukraine in the Ukrainian war. So again, usually we think, okay, what are the fronts? What should Israel be concerned about? And when there's violence on the Temple Mount, Hamas wants to come out and say, we're your champions, we'll support you. So what do? They stir up problems, and then they begin to launch rockets from Gaza into the Negev, into the southern portion of Israel. And then the question's always, and again last week, we heard that there were 2 rockets that were launched from the north. So now we've got a multi-front issue for Israel, not only Gaza, but now Lebanon, and now let's add to it, the Golan Heights are Syria. so you can understand the depth of concern that's taking place in these days. In the midst of all this, we will say that this last week was Holocaust Remembrance Day. 6 million Jews killed, murdered, exterminated, final solution by the Nazis, World War II. The phrase in Israel is always, never forget. And you'll see in slide number 8, there was a March for the Living. It's been postponed the last couple years because of COVID, but again, this year, if you take a look at that, in the background there is the gates of Auschwitz. This is Poland. And so Holocaust survivors, never forget, always remember. And then the last cartoon, which is sort of a pinch, a gut punch, something to be concerned about. To young teenagers, cartoon, saying, "What's wrong? Is there a problem with your phone?" This is Yad Vashem in the background, and the other person says, "It's out of memory." And the worst fate of the Holocaust is that if we forget the names, if we forget what took place. And so every year on Holocaust Memorial Day, it was Thursday this week, Israel shuts down. Sirens blast, cars pull over, people get out of their car and they stand in silence, remembering, never forgetting. Well, that's our report for this week. And again, we'll have one more live report, or YouTube that is, before we're off to Israel. A reminder, again, we're going to take groups back to Israel. That's really the heart and soul of Holy Ground Explorations. And our next tour will be September 14th through the 23rd of this year, 2022. All the information's on our website. We still have room, and we'd like to fill this trip up. So please pray about joining us. As I've said so many times, it's a life-changing trip to walk the land, especially if you love your Bible and if you love talking to Jesus. And probably more importantly, if you love being in a place to just listen to the voice of God, whether it's a still small voice, whether it's the land itself speaking, I assure you, there ain't nothing like a trip to Israel. God bless you, and shalom.